and welcome to another week, which means another huddle breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn, and I am joined as always by James and Alan. I don't know about you boys, but I had a fantastic weekend. An absolutely fantastic weekend. It was just a delight. How are you, Alan?
Yeah, I'm fine. As I say, I'm going to the doctor tomorrow, as I say, to see what tablets I need to reduce my Schadenfreude levels because they're just off the scale, and it probably isn't good for you. I feel like I've got a good few more days left in me, though, in terms of, you know, inserting content.
Yeah, I
Um,
think your only problem there is going to be joining the queue behind all the Rangers supporters there for painkillers. But yeah, it was a fantastic display, which we are going to get into. James, a good weekend for you, I presume?
It was. The only issue with the time change difference, the time difference is that it's so early in the morning here that unless I'm going to be a complete degenerate to start drinking at, 9 in the morning, at my age, that's just tough. So I had to wait until lunchtime at least to have some celebratory beer in nice clear skies, blue skies, nice weather. It was a delightful weekend and Sunday in particular.
Yeah, we actually had some of that nice weather this weekend as well. So, yeah, it was in more ways than one. It was a beautiful Sunday. James, I'll come to you first. We always like to start the podcast with a little bit of a general chat about the performance. Is it too much to say, or too much excitement at the result to say that it was a good performance? How did it play out in general terms for you?
Oh, I think overall, there's always details, there's always context, as we always say. But yeah, overall, objectively, it was a good performance. There were some challenging periods, particularly the first 10, 15 minutes, which we can get into. But yeah, overall, I would say, given what Rangers came in and threw at us, I'll start off with a cross sports analogy for you this time, Laura, which is it was like Mike Tyson, a young Mike Tyson coming out in the first round and trying to go berserk to knock the guy out and right away in the first 3 minutes. And that's kind of how Rangers came at us. And, we kind of took the blows, a little bit of luck mixed in there. Always like to have that. There were some chances that they had, but yeah, overall, I would say, really, really good performance.
Famous Mike Tyson quote. I think it was Mike Tyson anyway that said, "Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face," and I think that's exactly what happened to the team across the city. Alan, general thoughts from you? I'm very aware that the scoreline and the fact of who it was against and the enjoyment that you get out of that can sometimes make a performance appear to be better than it was. How did it sort of play out for you?
Yeah, and I think that's what Clement was trying to make the point afterwards. I think he was mainly trying to protect his players, to be honest with you. Which, if he wanted to do that, he should have hightailed it back to Ibrox and stood outside the ground. But anyway, I think he was trying to really, protect them. Graham Souness, who, bless him, what is he now? Must be getting into his 70s. Suddenly discovered data this week, which I'm really pleased that such legends of the game are actively using
Welcome,
data.
Mr. Souness. Welcome.
Yeah, yeah. But unfortunately, his first toe in the water on this was badly misplaced in terms of badly using data. Which, listen, this is what we're here for, obviously. So it was interesting in the sense of obviously a comprehensive scoreline. I think in again, just high level before we get into the detail, it was kind of the same again. We've seen this game now 5 times this season. We've played 5 matches, and they've all been kind of similar. And this was another one. I think there was different types of jeopardy in it for Celtic, but in respect of the level of control, having taken the lead, I think it was essentially the same again. And we're seeing a level again of, we keep using the words, consistency, calmness, but also I would add in togetherness. And I think this is another sort of hat tip to Rogers, really. So this is a sort of non-data thing, is that I do sense a strong, quiet togetherness amongst the squad of players. Little things, just like the way Bernardo celebrated the goal with McGregor when he'd already been taken off, the way that, how McGregor treated McCowan when he came on. These little things just speak to the manager creating an environment that is positive, that is supportive, and is together. And I don't think that's a trivial thing, because any of us that have worked for a living or never worked in any sort of work environment will know that's the mark of a good manager, is to create those sort of environments. So those were sort of high level takes from me. But I think the theme that we'll get into and get into the detail is, yes, 3-0. A lot of the stats don't scream 3-0 at you. And this is where we always come back to context and always come back to game state. And I feel like I've said this in every game this season, but that's because this was a very similar type of the way that the game played out was very similar to the other 4 games this season.
Yeah, plenty to break down as far as the performance goes, and as Alan said, game states and things like that. James, you touched on it, and I think it's probably best to start there. The first 10 minutes were chaotic, to say the least. I personally was a little bit divided between what I felt Rangers maybe did well in those opening 10 minutes and what we did poorly. What was your thoughts on that in terms of where those two things stacked up? Because I felt watching it that Rangers came out ready to press, ready to close us down, not giving us any time on the ball, and that mixed with a kind of apprehension and slight nervousness that we had led to this kind of rapid exchange of possession. But did that reflect what you saw in those opening 10 minutes?
Yeah, they I've talked about that since even the Ange Ball era, which is a viable strategy of our opposition to come out like this with a high press, go berserk for maybe the first 5 to 10 minutes before they try to nick an early goal and then play more reserved and withdrawn. So that's how Rangers came out, and we absolutely, objectively, we did not handle it well. It was pretty chaotic at the back. One thing that we do with data is to try and clarify a lot of I call it Derby dust, right? Which is that the dust, a good performance overall, a good score line kind of sprinkles that dust over everybody, and everyone kind of gets the best best version of them coming out of the game and kind of collective sentiment. So there were some dicey moments in that first 10 minutes where some players misplaced passes, not good on the ball, very kind of nervy. And, even people that are typically reliable, like Carter Vickers, just maybe a little bit apprehensive. And I think that was because they had dialed it up so high. They came out almost like a cage beast, like a Mike Tyson, and were so helter-skelter. The problem with that is it's hard to keep that up. And as you play that helter-skelter style, that also is difficult to maintain discipline as far as pressing triggers and, keeping organized. So that's like a scatter plot between those two things. So as that pressure dialed back a little bit, as they kind of went through that first exhaustion of adrenaline rush, and what was some issues with their structure and their pressing, and has been, this is nothing new. We talked about this with, players like Matondo and Dessers with Patrick last week in the preview show, as far as, they're not the greatest pressers. Those cracks start to form, and then you end up with what we had, which is 3 lightning fast forwards against a high defensive line with 4 defenders who can't defend for the most part, particularly in that way versus the people that we have to throw at them. So we weathered the storm basically. But, this is where it's always, in the Schadenfreude, it's always good to throw haymakers and all that stuff. So there are, layers of truth in some of the things that Clement said, for example, which is with game state. If one of those early chances, if Matondo does score on that header, does the game change? I don't know. But it wouldn't be crazy if that were the case. So there were sequences of play there in that first 10 minutes that were dicey. And but to Alan's point, that's been the pattern, is that even when they do get these opportunities, they haven't been executing on them. And that's why we had a striker that was rumored to go to Man City, right? He's a difference maker. He's, Maeda, same way, plays at a very high level in what he's good at. And the matchup with his team in particular and in Europe, very good. So they just continue to build their game plans about not mitigating those issues, which, long may it continue.
Long may it continue indeed. Certainly those of us of a certain vintage are aware of a time when, regardless of the means by which they did it, we had to watch as the other side of the city dominated games like this, and it's good to be on the other side of that, certainly now. Alan, talking about game states and situations that could have changed matters, sliding doors moments, that first Kyogo goal that was chopped off due to the massively offside position of Nicholas Kuhn. You could drive a bus between him and the Rangers defender. I don't know how much you want to talk about that, or whether we'll save that for another show. But certainly, I think, regardless of your thoughts on the legitimacy of the outcome, that chopped off goal still, I think, had the effect of breaking that period of pressure that Rangers had and making them nervous going into the latter part of the game.
Yeah, so listen, I'll just touch on it only because, for the reason that there's a live debate going on in Twitter at the moment I've got going, including the behind the whistle guys, Steve Conroy, the ex-referees, about this, because I've had people coming to me today trying to explain, the science of camera angles and cambers and the physics of angles and so forth. And I'm like, okay. Well, very clever, sounds great. However, the vertical line, the Rangers defender is doing that, and the vertical line that the Celtic attacker is doing that. So if you can show me multiple examples of similar offside decisions where you've got a player in the centre and a player nearest the camera, and the vertical lines are at different angles, I'll gracefully withdraw. But so far, I have to be honest, I feel like I'm being gaslit here, and I'm not seeing that body of evidence that must exist. If the pseudophysicists are correct, every offside line must be like this because of camber,
Alan,
or angle, or what have you. So what I'm saying to the listeners is, please find those examples. Let me have them. We can put this to bed.
At least it proves that the flat earthers are talking nonsense, because it's the curvature of the earth, I think, between Kuhn out on the right-hand side and the defender in the middle of the park that causes that change in the line. Somebody
actually went down those lines and had to politely point out they're about 10 yards apart, not fricking 1,000 miles. It's like, it's like... Anyway, so listen, but the other aspect of that goal was that, to sort of ham-fistedly build on your Mike Tyson analogies, is that they were getting a lot of punches in, but Celtic only had to smash them in the face once. They were doing a great job of stopping Celtic getting out, but Celtic only had to get out once to cause absolute carnage. And I think from that moment on, pretty much the game went in a very different direction. Celtic got their goal soon after. Which was a classic. I mean, it wasn't even that. I talk about 3 mistakes, right? This wasn't even 3. This was like 5, maybe 6 mistakes in a row for an opening goal. But mainly, Matondo loses his man. Then the whole defence drops far too deep. I mean, when the ball comes into the box, Suter should be touch tight on Kyogo, and he's actually 2 yards behind him. Proper falls over, which is, physical unintelligence. And then, bless him, Tavernier does his best Barisic impression. He's got a 5-yard head start on Maeda, who gets in front of him, and he ends up on his arse, a la good old Borna that we all miss. But the ball goes straight through Butland. Don't know what he's doing. So it's just a catalogue of absolute disasters. But that left side of the Rangers team. Matondo doesn't track his man. Jeffy doesn't really know where he is, and he's positionally kind of suspect. Proper is obviously just joined the team. It was all over the place. So that was a weak area for Celtic to exploit in that moment, and they absolutely ruthlessly did. And then, as I say, Celtic got their 2-goal lead by half time, and then in the second half, I think they had 10 shots to 6. And their one really great chance in the game came in the 90-something minute when the ball ricocheted around the box and ended up in McCausland's feet in front of goal, and Schmeichel made a great save. But again, and that boosted their XG quite considerably, just that one chance. But again, Celtic didn't go chasing the game. They didn't need to go chasing the game. They weren't stat padding. They weren't creating bundles of chances. They weren't hemming the Rangers into their own penalty area because they didn't need to. They had a 2-goal lead. At the end of the second half, it became like a testimonial. Celtic were literally stood still, just popping the ball off to each other under no pressure. It was that straightforward. So, you know, yes, the shots totals were very similar. Yes, the XGs were very similar. Yes, they had a similar number of touches in the box, etc. But one of the telling stats, which again speaks to quality, not quantity, is that Celtic's XG per shot was something like 0.17, and theirs was something like 0.1. That's a huge difference, even in a game. That's a big difference. So again, quality. Their pressing was impressive for 10 minutes. They won the 10-minute cup. Hooray! But again, if you look at regains as a percentage of pressures, Celtic regained the ball from about 23% of their pressures. They regained from about 16 or 17%. So quite a significant difference again. So the lesson of this game and the lesson for Mr. Souness is it's when you're looking at data, it's quality, not quantity.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I'm just as you're talking there, thinking I'm really disappointed that our former Brazilian defender Rafael Scheidt never got to play with their centre back proper, because I think it would have been an apt description of their performance yesterday. But the less said about that, the better. We are going to get into the nitty gritty. I know everybody comes up to the huddle breakdown for the tactical breakdowns and the statistical breakdowns. We are going to do that after this break. But before we do, Alan, as we've been trying to do with everybody, we're trying to explain how the huddle breakdown is expanding, how we're trying to, give more content and explain a little bit more about the type of content that's going to be available on all platforms this season. Can you tell us a little bit more about the offerings the huddle breakdown are going to have this season?
Yeah, sure. So, statement o'clock. So, as you've seen, we've got Laura on board now. Tuesday, we're trying to be more regular in terms of sticking to a consistent schedule. On Thursdays now, we've introduced another podcast with Martin, where we'll probably get a little bit deeper into things. It might be a slightly longer show in that regard. So I think we've been signposting for a few weeks now that the podcast will be heading in a new direction. Not so much in terms of the core nerdiness, of course, will still be there, but more in terms of bringing together a range of content into a more integrated platform. What does that mean? So specifically, we're going to be bringing you the weekly podcast, the weekly deeper dive as well. But in addition, what we'll be looking to do is bring the written content. So Celtic by Numbers, which was my old WordPress site, writing by Duco, by James himself as well, bringing it all together under a single channel. Also included within that will be the sort of regular Yorkshire Whistler features, and we're hoping to add an audio recording with the Yorkshire Whistler to try and maybe go a bit deeper into some of the absolutely kind of key decisions as well. So that's all to look forward to. Other things that are in the pipeline are publishing, stat reports from the games, the player benchmark exercises that James does, formalizing those into written content as well. And there's other content that we've got in the pipeline, which I'll leave till a later time. So all this is going to be hosted on a Substack. So it's going to be an integrated platform with all of that type of activity, but you should be able to continue to consume the podcast wherever you are doing it today through the wonders of technology, etc. Most exciting for me out of all of that is that as part of that platform, really start to establish what I call a community of spreadsheet shaggers, which I'm not sure is legal, and I think we're getting that legal as we speak in terms of whether we'll get away with that. But that's likely to involve some form of membership. But it's for people that will be looking for more detail, more deeper dives into the data and analysis and numbers around Celtic. So we're finessing all the details, but I just wanted to give an update of the current thinking.
That all sounds exciting, particularly that last spreadsheet bit. But the less said about that, the better. We'll wait and see what's on offer there. We'll take a short break, and then we'll be back with some of the nerdy, geeky stuff after this. James, the performance for the majority of the match, although we've gone over the frantic first 10 minutes, was very much all Celtic. Who stood out for you in terms of individual performances, or what did you notice about the way that we were playing that you thought was particularly of note pattern-wise in that game?
To segue off of what Alan had said about their defensive left, our attacking right was very important in the game. Alistair Johnston, I thought, was tremendous, both directions. I'll probably be putting together, as Alan mentioned, on the increased offering. I think part of that, and I'll just throw my 2 cents on that, is Alan and I have only shared over the years a small fraction of what we actually do. It's a lot of stuff in the background, and Alan spending 6 hours per game being a lunatic and collecting his data manually. So these benchmarking exercises that I've been doing, I do on all of our signings. I also do on Rangers because I get called obsessive by their supporters sometimes when I share them online. And it's because in a 2-team league, effectively, if you're not analyzing the other team, how are you actually analyzing your team? That's kind of my philosophy. So I've actually done a decent amount of work already. I haven't finished up with the window closing on who they recruited. And so Jeff D is actually a pretty good player. Like he's only 20. He's an attacking player. So in some way, and there's issues about fit. That's always an important part. But it's not like he's lacking in some positive attributes. He's quite fast, he's quick, and he's got a good cross on him. None of that has to do with defending. And is he ready to defend in a derby against Celtic? I would argue probably not. And that was reflected in the game, I think. Matondo, we've talked about many times in the past. And that's not his strength. That nexus of Kuhn, Bernardo, and Alistair Johnston, and even Carter Vickers. The standout there, I think, is Johnston. But that right-handed attack, I thought, was overall very good. Maeda was very, very good. Again, just being a pest, doing what he does and tracking back, pressing. And then the other one is Liam Scales. And so his... this was one of his games where we didn't get any of the bad stuff that you get sometimes with Scales, the mistakes, the misplaced pass, the pass that gets picked off and gets turned into a really dangerous transition. So he had some really important interceptions. I remember one particular, they were in transition and there was a through ball that he jumped the pass, or else Dessers was going to be in 1v1 on Schmeichel. So it was just a great read, a great interception. So those 3 players I thought were the ones that not only passed the eye test, but were also at the kind of the top of the charts as far as from a measurement perspective on the data side.
I think what I'm gathering from what you said there, and certainly from what I saw of the performance, I mean, we really didn't have a poor player on the park. If anything, it was about those slightly more outstanding performances that really got us over the line.
Alan's grinning. He's thinking of the same one I'm thinking of.
I suppose I better ask you, Alan, who are you thinking of, and how much detail do you want to go into here?
No, I don't think there was a terrible performance, honestly. It was more that I was just reflecting back on what James said previously about the sort of derby win, sparkly dust that gets, it infects everybody equally and pushes it all up. The sentiment in the stadium, McGregor, man of the match. I mean, McGregor actually didn't get on the ball all that much, but he did. What he did do, it was kind of effective. He also gave up 3 really bad situations where he got caught in possession facing his own goal a number of times, and as did Bernardo. I mean, Bernardo was a workhorse in that first half, but he got caught a couple of times really badly. So
2 really bad fouls too.
Yeah, and Taylor. I mean, actually, Taylor had a terrific game, and he did a lot of what he did was essentially nullify Sherney. He clocked pretty quickly that Sherney was always going to cut in on his left, always, like never. He never didn't cut in on his left. Now Sherney's not particularly quick, but he's probably a little bit quicker than Taylor. But Taylor and Scales between them made sure that every time uh, Cherney cut into traffic, and I think Taylor's arguably the fittest player we've got at the club, but he was absolutely spent at the end. And in the 84th minute, he gave the ball away 3 times in a minute in really bad areas, Taylor, which just kind of blotted his copybook a little bit, because otherwise he did a terrific game, doing a lot of stuff that was kind of unnoticed and probably didn't register in the data. He just kept that right hand side of their attack kind of pinned down really well. But I agree with James in terms of when you dissipated all of the fairy dust and the sparkle dust away and look at the data, you'll see that StatsBomb had Alistair Johnson. I think he had an OBV of 1 for the game, which is incredible. I don't think I've seen that before, James. Maybe, I mean, OBV averages. I mean, if you're averaging anywhere
not
near
for a
point
fullback
3
for sure.
at the end of the season, that's like really high.
Yeah.
So an OBV of 1, even on a single game basis, is I don't think I've seen that. And then Opta had Maeda as their man of the match and Johnson second. I had Johnson man of the match for me because of his all round game, in that he had as many successful challenges, interceptions, etc. as Scales. They both had 11. He won the ball back 4 times in his own defensive third, which was second only to Carter Vickers. He led the team in just cleanly winning back possession. He did that 8 times. The next highest was 5. An assist for the first goal, which broke the game, essentially. He had the second highest pack passing score behind Scales. He also had a pretty good pack receiving score, which meant he was actually Hitati. Hitati had the highest packing score in the game, which I was a little bit surprised about, because he seemed to be a bit off it in some of his passing, but actually when you watch it back, he had a really strong game overall. So Johnson for me was the top. I don't think anybody. Maybe I don't know. Maybe James, you've got somebody in mind, but I don't think anyone was really bad. I mean, I would struggle to say anyone was even average, as you said, Laura. But for me, yeah, Johnson was probably the standout.
I have a question for you, Alan, and then I'll answer your question for me, which is what were the relative kind of overall team-wide packing scores between the two teams?
Yeah, so this is hilarious, right? The absolute vicious, vile abuse that James Tavernier gets from their support. He had the highest packing score in the game. He remains their most important player by a distance, and that's passing the ball through the lines and receiving the ball in advanced positions. I know defensively he's not the best; he never has been. But in terms of when I talk about creativity in the wider sense, I don't mean putting the ball on somebody's head in the 6 yard. I mean progressing the ball either through positioning, receiving, or passing. He was by miles their most effective player in that regard, and he had a higher packing score than Hattati. About he had a six points more than him. I think this is the absolute malaise of cognitive dissonance being suffered at the other side of the city. I get that Dessers is not effective in these games and probably not effective against quality opposition. And Tavernier's absolutely terrified of Maeda. I mean, you can see it. Maeda absolutely had a field day closing him down and tracking back and so forth. But where we are today, where we are now, and I know we're going to come onto this further later in the show, is the reason that they'll probably remain second is going to be largely down to Tavernier and Dessers against all the other teams, right? And I don't think they realise that at all. In fact, I know they don't realise it. If you replace Tavernier with Sterling at right back, and you replace Dessers with like a Lauren Shankland as a striker, you're looking at a battle for second place, right? So yeah, great question and a very sobering answer if you're of the blue persuasion.
Well, so coming out, the Derby dust both ways, meaning that you get the incoherent reactionary response of the team that loses, which was, that was the delightful part of the Schadenfreude in the last couple of days. The scenes were amazing. But and then you get the kind of the boost on the winning side, and we've seen that. I think Bernardo is probably the most obvious one, where the sentiment coming out. I'm not saying he had a bad game. I'm just saying kind of the collective sentiment on his game was way out of kilter with how he actually performed. But I thought the biggest kind of break in those two was the relative performances of the midfields. I thought they actually won the midfield battle. Not hugely, but on the margins. And, there were some ups and downs there, but generally speaking, I thought Hatate, now some of that was because they did go man to man. So this goes back to this issue of, personal matchups and then what that does to the overall resilience and the tactics of the team. So I think one of the things Clement did was go more man-to-man against Hatate and even Bernardo at times, and definitely McGregor. And I think they were reasonably effective in nullifying those players as far as with that, one big outlier, exception with Bernardo's brilliant pass, but that was kind of a weird thing off of a throw-in, right? That wasn't like open play. We carved them up through the midfield. So I think actually they were relatively effective in nullifying us through the midfield. I think the cost of that was they exposed their back line because of us dragging them out of position and because of Kyogo being able to drop in like he did on his goal. But yeah, I thought, again, some of the rhetoric out of their side relative to their midfielders, I thought was, their midfield wasn't the reason they lost the game. I thought they were much bigger problems. The manager, his tactical setup, and then, proper and just the back four. And again, some of them, I'm not, like, to your point, you can't expect a 20-year-old in Jefty to come into that environment who's not a defensive specialist, whose thing is going forward and attacking. I mean, they had him at wing already in this season out of necessity, but, he skews that way, and Tavernier as well. And, Proper was terrible. So I thought that was the bigger issue. And Butland had another one of his, which becoming a beautifully stereotypical game against us. But I just wanted to touch out on that point because I thought, that's something where the sentiment on our midfield has been kind of overwrought relative to, and theirs underwrought relative to what actually happened.
So two things on that. And one is, I think you're right, and there were opportunities that they generally struggled to actually play through our secondary press, if you like. So they would get through the first line, but then what was happening over and over was they would get the ball into maybe Desser's feet or Czerny's feet, and it would just come straight back again. And the difference with Celtic was when Celtic got the ball through that first line, whoever received it was immediately going forward and immediately looking to sprint towards the opposition goal. And I think that speaks to the deficit that Souness identified in the two forward lines, just on sheer quality, sheer ability, really. But the second thing is, when do we start talking about Clement? Because I thought Patrick Kasky did a really good job in trying to articulate what was it was a genuine question for me. Not I wasn't setting him up in terms of a topic. I genuinely don't know what he's trying to do. I genuinely don't see a culture, a system, patterns. If we think about back to Gerrard and Beale, when they had that team, and it was the Christmas tree you talked about, James, and exactly what you're going to get. You're going to get a narrow 4-3-3. You're going to get real solidity out of possession, and you're going to get ball carriers going forward at pace whenever they broke, etc. I don't see what he's trying to do. I don't, and he's a year in now, and a lot of these are his players. So I think that's a fair topic as well, really, because I just don't see it.
The one addendum I'll close with then on this segment is a notable difference for them. And again, we talked about this with Patrick last week, was they did play the ball on the deck more. So their ratio of long passing, those long cross balls from Goldson to the left wing, that kind of pass was not prominent in this game. Their percentage of actually long passes was about half of what it's been relative to recent derbies against us, even under Clement. So again, I'm not sure what he's trying to do either, but that was different. So I'll throw that in there.
So you just reminded me of one thing, other big difference, and actually, they won the ball high up twice, 2 times the times that Celtic won the ball high up. So credit for that in terms of what he was trying to do. But the other aspect was crossing. So almost all their crosses came from wide and deep, as in, not even they were crossing the ball
Early.
before they'd even reached the edge of the 18-yard box. That is a very speculative form of getting the ball into the box. Celtic's crossing tends to be within the box, low and cut back, which is a very effective way of crossing the ball. And I think that was a very obvious difference in the two ways that the teams tried to attack.
Listen, guys, I don't think you're being very fair to Philip Clement. Do you not remember that he beat Ross County 6-0 last week? He was at pains to tell us that.
Somebody pointed out that in Ange's first derby, lost 1-0 at Ibrox. The 2 games prior, he'd won 6-0 and 6-0 against Dundee. And Ross County. I don't remember anybody mentioning that after we'd lost to Ibrox.
No, neither do I. Certainly least of all Ange himself.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind, and speaking of which, we will go on to in the next section talk about where this leaves us in the context of the title race, which we'll do next. Alan, as we sit here, we are one of only 2 teams with a 100% record left in the Scottish Premiership, the other being Aberdeen. I had to double check here because I just wanted to make sure I was getting my figures right. Dundee United sit 3rd and Rangers sit 4th. Dundee United on 8 points, Rangers on 7 points, tied with Motherwell. There was a little bit of... Anybody who saw the Sky Sports coverage will have seen Chris Boyd throwing his various toys out of the pram in spectacular fashion. To be fair to him, and I hate to use those words... Oh, that's my Siri just telling me to be quiet there. To be fair to him, sort of was not happy clapping Rangers at the end there, and did mention that rather than focus on catching up with Celtic, they have to make sure that they are ahead of the rest of the pack. Now, obviously, that isn't the case at the moment. Statistics, as you well know, are skewed because of the lack of data that we have in terms of the lack of games. Based on that performance, how much better are we than Rangers, and how realistic is it that they might find themselves in a battle for even second place?
So, I mean, yeah, listen, and the current league table is giving me strong 1983 vibes, which is just brilliant. So, so we're actually back to 2021, and where we started with the huddle breakdown in terms of what they're looking into is with significantly less quality players, a very similar situation to what Celtic faced into under Neil Lennon, where you've got risk, layered upon risk, layered upon risk. And the better opposition that you play, the more of those risks will manifest into serious issues for you. You've got 2 of your key players in the goalkeeper Butland and Tavernier, who both were expecting not to be at the club after the summer and are still there. I suspect don't want to be there. You've got, and we saw this with Ayer and Edouard and Christie, right? We've been there, and we know you don't get the best out of players in that situation. You've got arguably the only change they could have made on Sunday to make their starting 11 as strong as it could be would be to bring in Yilmaz for Yefty. But to be honest with you, they both have the same weakness in the sense of their positional play and being caught in transition. Both centre backs are very slow, and I don't think they've got anyone to bring in that would remedy that. You've got a 22-year-old kid being asked to cover pretty much the width of the pitch in front of the back 4, and Connor Barron, who I suspect will burn himself out before the next international break, such as the work he's having to put in front of that back 4. You've got a very athletic midfielder in Diomande who's an indisciplined nightmare in terms of he may get away with it in Scotland, but in Europe, his sly little kicks, his accumulation of fouls, his little elbows, and so forth. in Europe, you won't get away with those, and they will have a negative impact. And then, as Graham Souness rightly identified, and as we've highlighted, you've got this enormous quality gulf up front. You've got a number 10 in Lawrence, who's I don't even know if he's English Championship level, frankly. You've got Dessers, who we've spoken about at length, he's going to do well against the lesser teams in the league. You've got Czerny, who's incredibly predictable and lacks pace, and you've got Matondo, who's just so erratic and unpredictable, but not in a good way. And then you've got a manager who doesn't seem to have a clear tactical plan about how to play against his biggest rival. So I just see this is a mess in terms of risk upon risk upon risk. And the background to all this is unlike Celtic, who could sell Ayer, Christian, Edouard for reasonable money and rebuild, bringing in, decent quality players. They're not in that situation. So the question then becomes, are any of the other SPFL teams, best placed to actually take advantage of that and put together a serious challenge? I honestly don't think that any of the squads have got that quality, and I think as well we've not seen the best of a number of teams. Hibs and Hearts have been hampered by having a decent squads of players but dreadful managers. Kilmarnock and St Mirren have been hampered by very small squads, good managers, but they can't handle playing European football and SPFL football at the same time. And so that's left the door open for Aberdeen, Dundee. Dundee seem to have a good manager, seem to have a vibrancy about them, playing attacking football. Aberdeen seem to have a man with a plan, and they've got some momentum behind them. They've got some belief behind them. They've got some consistency behind them. I watched them at Ross County. They were dreadful for most of the game, but that ability to sneak a 1-0 win in the 96th minute, that builds confidence in the squad and the belief in the squad. I don't know if they can sustain it. If I look at the underlying data, you've still got really the Rangers being probably a distant second to Celtic, and then you've got a little cluster: Aberdeen, Motherwell, Dundee United, Dundee. Currently, I would expect the teams that I mentioned previously to improve. Frankly, I can't imagine Naismith will last much longer at Hearts, and if they could bring in somebody competent, I would expect them to improve greatly. So I don't know is the honest answer. At this moment, I'd be very cautious about thinking that any of those sides could sustain that the consistency needed to finish second. But as far as the Rangers are concerned, I just honestly, again, trying to be objective here, I just see them in a bit of a toxic combination nightmare as far as their lineup and approach.
James, a big theme of what Alan was saying there about the likelihood of Rangers to have to face a battle for second place was less to do with them and more to do with the opposition being able to keep up the consistency to challenge them. Looking at Celtic, it's certain that we have a manager in Brendan Rodgers who will not let us dip our level of performance if he can at all help it. The question there then is, based on the fact we now have those last few signings in at the end of the transfer window, do you feel we're in good shape going into the rest of this season to keep up the level of consistency that ideally Brendan Rodgers will want and that would let us sort of run away with this league title if possible?
As is my apt, I'm going to tap the brakes a little bit on the optimism, and not to say that I'm not optimistic. I mean, you'd have to be daft not to be optimistic at this point. But I think this part of the Schadenfreude of talking about a race for second with Aberdeen or whoever else, I think it leans more towards that than a serious case to be made that's more likely than them challenging for first.
Just let me have my fun,
Oh,
James.
no, well,
let me have my fun.
We're on brand here. We're here to ruin the fun usually. And the best way I can put it, so, the hardest part about it, analytics, is using what's happened to try and predict the future, right? There's all kinds of models that try this, and they usually stink, like weather models, and, because the world's a lot more complicated than these dopey models and statistical correlations historically would suggest. And so what I think's happening, I think that we are better built for Europe, without a doubt. I think that we're going to be problematic, particularly for pot 3, 2, and 1 teams. Ironically, and Aston Villa, who aren't really a pot 4, even though they are. I think we could have more of a headache with Bratislava, actually, in some ways, because they're going to be disciplined and come in and defend. And the crazy part is that through all of preseason and now effectively 6 weeks into the season, we haven't faced the team that's done that yet, which is kind of crazy for given our history. Like usually you find, you run into a St. Mirren or a St. Johnston, they're going to, just crowd the 18 and bunker. And I think until we prove that we can create chances consistently against that kind of defending, I'm going to be a little concerned on that front. I'm not saying we can't, I'm not saying we won't, but the loss of O'Reilly and the swapping out in midfield and some of these other things that are going on leave me a little cautious in that regard. And it's not Kuhn's strength, for example. The flip side of that is I think Rangers, to Alan's point, have become more like Celtic, a mini Celtic in the sense of, I think what he is trying to do generally, like the details are fuzzy, but I think Clement is trying to, and maybe their recruitment guy, is they're trying to make them better against domestic competition, which might make them worse against European competition. And I'll use one of their players as a perfect example in this. Czerny, when I did my benchmarking on him, I didn't do it at Wolfsburg in the Bundesliga first. I did because what I did first created questions and led me to look at that season too. But I looked at his last season in Eredivisie at FC20, and I noticed a pattern with his benchmarking. He was almost like a Tadic light. If you're familiar with Tadic, I'm not saying he's as good as him or the same player, obviously, or as talented or as quality, but he brings a lot of the same attributes, a high risk type of player, a creative player. But Czerny suffers against people that are more athletic and fast, like Maeda, who can basically squash him. And that's what he ran into in the Bundesliga. In Eredivisie, he shredded people. He ripped people apart in a Tadic kind of way. And against the bottom, 10 teams in the SPFL that are going to bunker against Rangers, he's the type of player that's going to turn those draws away to Ross County into a win that they haven't had. Jefty, again, he is a good attacking player. So is he going to be able to help them score more? Because that's been their problem, is creating. They have not matched us in a creative sense domestically, really, since a period in the 1920 season when they were fully firing. Morelos was in peak Morelos. Davis was still not off the cliff as far as physical decline and creative deep passing. And I think long story short, I think I'm using this analogy to introduce the concept. I'm not saying this is what we're going to face, but I think the closest analogy, if you're going to be worried, create worry, meaning that look for reasons to be worried, would be the 08-09 season, where Rangers had a huge retrenchment in spending coming out of the global financial crisis. Their revenue was down huge, and their wage bill came down a good bit. It was only about 80% of ours. We went out to a 7-point lead in the league, and through a huge run of draws against crappy teams domestically, we ended up losing that league by 4 points to what was probably an inferior Rangers side. And that, again, obviously kicked them off to 3 in a row. In each season, we outspent them by a healthy chunk, right? So it's not all about money. So I share that not to be raising the alarm bells. It's too damn early, first of all. And second of all is I do see scenario where they are better against the rest of the league than they have been. And that's, head to head, like until they change something, which there's not much evidence of that yet. Still confident and comfortable which, can also be scary from a complacency perspective. But it's that versus the rest of the league, where how we match up versus the rest of the league, I'm not sure yet. And I see them moving in a direction where there's a scenario where they could be better. And
on that happy note, it'll be time to wrap up. I do appreciate, James, that a little bit of caution is good to throw in there with all the excitement. Let's hope it pans out a little bit more optimistically than that. But yes, good to pump the brakes and see where we're at. Before we finish up, Alan, I just wanted to ask you, were you a creative consultant for the opening credits of the Sky Sports coverage? I only ask because there was a heavy influence on the phrase old firm, which at first I was very annoyed by, until I realised that the whole segment was set in a graveyard, and I thought it was very apt, actually.
Do you know what? Because I often I am essentially the likely lad Celtic Supporters Club, in that it was father-in-law's birthday on Sunday, so it was a day of pretty much ignoring my phone, and I didn't watch it till about 7 o'clock in the evening. So I probably rushed past that opening. I didn't even watch the opening segment, to be honest with you. So I missed that. And by the way, no one's ever accused me of being creative in my life. So.
Well, there you go. I just did wonder, but it was enjoyable nevertheless. We will see you next week for the usual weekly Tuesday show with myself, Alan, and James. And Alan and James will see you on Thursday with Martin for the Thursday show. Anything you guys want to add before we wrap up?
No.
No, just go steady on that Schadenfreude. Try and you limit your daily intake. I think we've got another 2 weeks of it, is the good news. Yeah, we've got another 2 weeks of it, so you don't have to stuff it all down on day 1, day 2. Plan it into your week as you get plenty of days to choose from.
If I could tell you where to start, I would recommend the Super Scoreboard coverage from Monday night. It was thoroughly enjoyable, a great feast for the ears. Thank you, James. Thank you, Alan, and everybody. We will see you again next week.